Now we're going to talk a little bit about night vision and some of the errors that the body has as far as the eye is concerned, and the biological makeup of the eye, and how night vision is so much different than vision during the day. Focus, off-center viewing, why that's necessary, all the components related to that, and some illusions we'll have as a pilot as far as trying to make an approach to landing, doing traffic patterns, being able to see and avoid other traffic, and illusions that we can have in thinking things are traffic which really aren't. Also, pre-flight and necessary steps we need to take during pre-flight to make sure our eyes are adjusted well to the flight beforehand. Also checking of the aircraft's lights during the pre-flight, taxi and run-up considerations, as well as takeoff, traffic pattern, if we incur any emergency while in flight, and steps we need to take to make sure we're as safe as possible. Also, the importance of using instrument references in the aircraft during flight, more so than we would during the day. So we're going to go ahead and start with the eye and the way it functions and the differences between nighttime viewing and daytime viewing. We have drawn as a basic eye. Obviously, this is the front of the eye, the back of the eye. And along the back of the eye, we have two different types of cells called rods and cones. And your rods help you with your nighttime viewing, and cones with your daytime viewing. And along the sides of the eye, in the back, we have alternating rods and cones. So these are your rods, cones, rods, cones, rods. But in the center, in the very back of the eye, is what we have called the fovea. And the fovea consists 100% of cones, which are your daytime viewing organs. And then again, on this other periphery, we have rods and cones alternating. And cones are responsible for centered viewing. When you're staring straight at an object, the ability for your eye to focus on that object is determined by the usage of cones. And simply because, as humans, we're biologically made to act during the day. Most of our activity is going to be during the day, and so we have that centered viewing during the day. And the cones are responsible for acuity, which is a sharpness of vision, and clarity, the ability to focus on an object. And then the rods help us with nighttime viewing, but we also have cones in the periphery, which helps for our off-center viewing as well. That's why we have the best vision during the day. And the rods, once adapted to the dark, are 100,000 times more sensitive to light than the cones are. So during nighttime viewing, we're using mostly our rods. As we can see from this drawing, we don't have any rods in the center viewing portion of the eye. So what does that mean to us as pilots operating at night? That means that at night, our rods are going to be the ones that are active. Since we don't have any in the center, that leads us to have a blind spot at night. And this can be noticed if, say, you're outside at night and you're looking up at the stars, your eyes are focused to the dark, and you look directly at a star and it seems to kind of either become blurry or completely disappear from view. If you look just slightly off-centered, between 5 and 10 degrees off-centered, you're using your peripheral vision, which is what aids in your ability to view that object at night. So when you look just barely to the side of that star, you'll be able to see it. You look directly at it, and you can lose the object completely altogether. We're going to talk about some disorientation and optical illusions a pilot has at night. One thing we'll talk about is a false horizon. When you're flying operations at night on really dark nights where you don't have a visual reference to the horizon, you can use, let's say, a sloping cloud formation if you can kind of see that, or more importantly, lights on the ground, lights that are spaced at different distances from the pilot. We'll go ahead and draw that out. Can confuse a pilot into thinking that that is the horizon. Or let's say a road with lights along it that's trailing off into the distance but at an angle to the pilot may confuse that with the horizon. So this is our aircraft. This is our horizon. our actual horizon, and these lights here, let's say, are a road that's trailing off into the distance, we might want to align our aircraft with these lights, because our body wants to maintain symmetry. We see our instrument panel, glare shield, we see these lights, automatically our brain thinks, okay, that's the horizon, we're going to line ourselves up with it. When in actuality, our horizon's like this. Obviously, these lights are not projecting beyond the horizon, but we're using this as a visual reference. So in this situation, the pilot may actually bank the aircraft to the left, trying to align himself with what he thinks is the horizon. That can lead to unusual attitudes. That's why it's very important at night that we pay close attention to our instrumentation, which would be much more so than flights during the day. Also a thing called autokinesis. Autokinesis is where you have a light, maybe even a star, or lights out in the distance from a distant town. And you look at it, if you stare at it for long enough, it seems like it's moving. And there was a case with, I believe it was a airline from Canada, had a ATC warn them of traffic in their vicinity. They need to take evasive action. And the pilot looked up, he saw a planet, Venus I believe it was, and thought immediately, oh, that's the aircraft, and started a dive to get away from that perceived aircraft. And actually the aircraft that they were trying to avoid was below them. So it actually put themselves on a collision course just because of disorientation. So we need to be very aware of our surroundings and the illusions that can hit us at night. One thing that we can do as pilots is reduce the lighting in the cockpit. And why do we need to stay away from this light? Well, the rods that are responsible for our nighttime viewing are composed of what's called rhodopsin, or visual purple. What happens is they are much more receptive to pick up light at dark, but they do take some time to respond to the darkness. They say on average it takes the human eye about 30 minutes being in complete darkness for the rods to become completely effective. But with the presence of white light, you can, within a matter of seconds, reduce that rhodopsin to levels where the eye is no longer able to be adjusted to that darkness, and then it takes another 30 minutes to become readjusted. So what we need to do is make sure that our cockpit lighting in the aircraft is turned down to a minimal level to be safe, and also be able to maintain the rhodopsin levels. One thing that we can do as pilots to assist in the ability to read our instruments and have light at the same time, keeping our eyes adjusted to the dark, is by using red light. And red light on the visual spectrum has a longer wavelength than does bright white light. Therefore, it does not deplete the rhodopsin levels in our rods as quickly. This can lead to some problems when using aeronautical charts, because the red light causes a washout of color, especially when letters or objects are drawn on these charts in red. Oftentimes it's impossible to see. So in those situations we can use a very dim white light to look at that chart. Or one thing we can do is to cover one of our eyes if we need to use white light. That way at least one of our eyes is still staying adjusted to the darkness. We can view the chart, make appropriate corrections to our flight path, whatever we need to do with that light, and then when we turn it back off, we will have one good eye, and the other will go ahead and start adjusting to the darkness again. When we do a pre-flight inspection of our aircraft, a good rule of thumb, if it's possible to do, is do your pre-flight about a half an hour in advance. Go out with your bright white light, because you want to do a thorough inspection of the aircraft, and you don't want to take your red light out there because it's a bit dim. So go ahead and do a thorough inspection of your aircraft. Make sure everything's good to go. Fuel levels are where they need to be. Complete that pre-flight. And then go sit in a dark room or in a dark place for around 30 minutes if possible. Go ahead and get that rhodopsin built back up in your rods. One thing we can do when we are testing our light equipment on the aircraft, as far as our strobe lights goes, when you're walking around the aircraft, shield your eyes from the strobes. What I do sometimes is just cover my hand over the strobe as I walk around the wing. You can obviously tell that the strobe is still working, but you don't have that really, really bright white light flashing in your face, and that can really help retain the levels of rhodopsin in your eye as well. Something we need to make sure of is engine starting procedures and anti-collision lights. The aircraft is required to have anti-collision lights and navigation lights at night. Your anti-collision light can either be your strobes or a rotating beacon, and your navigation lights consist of a red light on your left wing, a green light on your right wing, and also a white light on your tail. And this is very similar to the lights required for nautical applications. And when we're starting our aircraft at night, vigilance must be maintained to make sure that we're not starting that prop in the presence of other people. So it's recommended to go ahead and turn on your strobes unless there's other aircraft in the vicinity that are getting ready to taxi, because your strobes will damage their rhodopsin levels. Turn on your rotating beacon, your nav lights. Go ahead and maybe cycle your landing light or taxi light on and off a couple times just to let people know in the area that you're getting ready to start the aircraft. But make sure you do start the aircraft within a very short amount of time, as running those lights can deteriorate your battery levels and put unnecessary strain on the electrical system of the aircraft. When we do start the aircraft, we must be very sure, and this especially applies during run-up situations, that we have the brakes applied to the max, or use the parking brake as well to help us, because our visual cues to the ground are limited, and we may not feel the aircraft slightly rolling forward, which can cause danger, even maybe a runway incursion. So make sure that you're using proper braking and make sure the aircraft is not rolling. When taxiing the aircraft, we need to make sure that we understand the lights that are available to us on the airport surface. We also need to have our taxi and landing light on if possible. Also, it helps other aircraft see you and to confirm your position on the ground. You can see that you're not rolling, and understand your taxi lights or blue lights and all the indications on the airport surface that'll help you be safe in your taxiing. Also, double check with your airport diagram, make sure you're taxiing properly, and if any lights are out of order on the airport surface, such as taxiway identification lights, make sure you let air traffic control with the proper authorities know of those outages. Also, it's important for pilots to read any NOTAMs before they go of any lights that may be out of service. This includes runway lights, taxiway lights, identification lights, as well as lights on towers in the vicinity that you might encounter in flight. Any of this information can be found in NOTAMs, as well as make sure that you're familiar with the airport facility directory and the lighting available to you at that airport. Let's continue with the night operations when pertaining to takeoff and climb out. This is where reliance on our instruments becomes very vital, and pre-flight practice should be done with an instructor before doing night flights with sole reference to instruments, and we can see here in a minute how this becomes very important. When taking off at night, make sure obviously we've identified the proper runway and we've complied with air traffic control's instructions or made announcements on Unicom or CTAF frequencies. And make sure your taxi and landing light both are on. There's no reason to just have a landing light on, turn the taxi light off, if the taxi light is able to help you maintain center line and orientation on the runway surface. And when you're climbing out, especially if you're flying in an area that doesn't have many ground reference lights or there is a limited horizon, it's sometimes difficult to tell your altitude simply by reference to the ground. Also, your pitch can be deceiving, as we have your acceleration illusions, where when you accelerate you feel like you're pitching up. Different illusions can mess with your body. So it's very important to already have established proper reference to instrumentation, such as a certain RPM setting with a certain pitch attitude should yield a certain airspeed. And we can verify that by cross-checking our gauges. Also, looking at our VSI, it'll indicate our rate of climb in hundreds of feet, as well as we can check that with our altimeter. So we have plenty of instruments on board the aircraft to be able to let us know as pilots of our climb rate. And also, if we're staying in the traffic pattern, if we have a heading indicator that has a heading bug, it's very important that we go ahead and align that heading bug with our runway's heading reference. That way we can use it as a vital reference when making our turns in the traffic pattern. When in the traffic pattern, if possible, go ahead and leave your lights on if it's not causing too much load on the electrical system of the aircraft. That's good. It's for the see and avoid concept. And operation lights on. When operating within 10 nautical miles of the airport, the FAA recommends that you leave as many lights on as possible. That way you're aiding in collision avoidance. Some things we need to be aware of when flying at night, when leaving the traffic pattern, for instance, when flying at higher altitudes, even above 5,000 feet. There's no requirement in the aviation regulations to have any kind of supplemental oxygen unless you're above 12,500 feet for a time of greater than 30 minutes. But the eye loses a lot of its ability to focus and view at night since we're using just our rods. And it requires a substantial amount of oxygen for these rods to function. So it's found by the FAA that even at altitudes above 5,000 feet, some of our nighttime viewing can be deteriorated by insufficient levels of oxygen. We can boost this by using supplemental oxygen if our aircraft is so equipped. Also, carbon monoxide poisoning that bonds to your blood and limits the ability for your blood to be able to take that oxygen. Different things, hypoxia, smoking adds 2,000 feet. Or the feeling of being 2,000 feet higher than you actually are because it limits the ability of your blood to carry oxygen, which is very important for nighttime viewing. Things we can avoid are alcohol, obviously, and any kind of drugs, even just over-the-counter medications that we might not consider to be drugs as far as the general public is concerned. Also, if you have vitamin A or vitamin C deficiencies, that can also limit your ability for the blood to carry oxygen. And just an overall fatigue and unhealthiness. A good healthy diet and being well rested can aid you very much in your ability to have better night vision. So we need to make sure that we are fit as pilots to fly and we are not consuming any alcohol or drugs that are not approved for flight. And some problems we can have as pilots when coming into land at night is if you're coming into land over an area that's not very well lit, and what they call the black hole approach, and what happens is quite simply you lose your reference to the ground, and oftentimes the pilot will think they're higher than they are because they don't have a good visual reference to the ground, and so they'll end up flying a bit lower of an approach. Also, if your runway lights are really dark, you'll fly a bit low of approach. Simply because the closer you are to a light, the brighter it seems. If there's a light 3 miles away, it's going to be a lot dimmer to you as a pilot than if you're, let's say, a quarter mile from that light. So, conversely speaking, if your runway lights are very bright, you're going to feel like you're much closer than you really are. Therefore, you're going to be flying a bit higher of an approach. Things like rain and fog and haze will make the pilot feel like you're further away than you are, and you'll end up flying a bit lower of an approach. Also, one thing we need to make sure of if we're flying VFR at night, that we have, I've checked all of our weather briefings and any information available to us as pilots. We need to make sure that we're not flying into any kind of restricted visibility, as that can definitely cause us to be in unusual attitudes and maybe lose aircraft control. One thing we can note, if we don't have a very bright night, we're flying, we lose a visual reference to the horizon. If you look below, you can see the lights on the ground kind of starting to fade or getting what they call a halo around them. Then it's obvious that there's visible moisture, and you may be flying into fog or clouds. So you need to stop your ascent if you're climbing, or if you're just in straight and level flight and you're noticing these effects, go ahead and turn back to where you know that there are VFR conditions behind you. We're going to talk for a minute about landing practices without the use of an aircraft landing light, both in an actual situation and for training purposes. It's a safe procedure that can be done and should be done with student pilots obviously when conditions are considered safe for such operation. What you do is when you're coming into land, if possible, use any kind of indication you have as to your descent path, such as a VASI or a PAPI. And if not so equipped with that, be familiar with the runway and the runway width, as these cues can help you determine your height above the runway surface. When you approach to land, you should be familiar with the aircraft flap settings and approach airspeeds. Make sure you're within that criteria. And when you're approaching to land, you can use the width of the runway, if it's a known runway, which you should for your practice at least. And you can determine how high you are from the ground by how wide the runway is appearing from either side of the aircraft. Also, when you're looking down the runway, when the lights at the far end of the runway seem to be rising as it's coming up above the glare shield, it's a good indication that you're fairly low and you can commence your round out and flare at such time. Just make sure that the airspeed is kept at a safe speed. That way you don't stall too high and contact the runway with a lot of force. Just slightly let the aircraft down on the runway. If you initiate this flare a bit high, like I said, keep the power in just to just very softly let the aircraft contact the surface. If you find that you've misjudged your distance from the runway and you're consuming much of the runway distance in your attempt to put the aircraft down, go ahead and initiate a go-around. And this procedure is very similar to a go-around during the day. We use the flap settings and power settings as recommended by the manufacturer for the go-around. Also, same thing on your climb out when you initiate the go-around. Make sure you're using the power settings, flap settings, and pitch that you are used to in the aircraft to achieve that VY climb that you need. Also let Unicom, CTAF, or tower know that you're commencing a go-around. If you should encounter an emergency situation at night, there are some things that we can consider to make this as safe as possible for a pilot. One thing you want to do as soon as you lose your engine is complete all checklists as necessary to try to restart the engine after you have maintained your best glide speed. And if your engine fails to start, find yourself a suitable landing place. Now, at night, this is going to be someplace away from lots of lights. Obviously, lights are indicative of buildings and towers and people. Obstructions might not allow for a safe forced landing. So land in an unlit portion, if possible, close to a road or other kind of a feature you can determine that you might be able to put the aircraft down there safely, and also be readily available for emergency personnel to come and assist you. And when you do your emergency landing, if you have lost obviously your alternator, which most likely you will in this scenario, keep the electrical load limited. In a lot of aircraft, the flaps are operated by the electrical system, so you want to be able to put flaps down if necessary to make that approach at the minimum controllable airspeed. If you have no reference to the ground as you're slowing the aircraft, try to keep it in a level attitude, and don't flare, as you may cause the aircraft to stall it at a much higher distance above the ground than would be desirable for a forced landing. And also, as soon as the aircraft has contacted the ground, if you can, right before the aircraft contacts the ground, go ahead and unlatch the door. That way, if the forced landing causes any buckling of the aircraft's fuselage, it will not keep you from being able to exit the aircraft. And if possible, go ahead and shut off all the electrical components. Just kill the master that way. If you do have broken fuel lines or fuel leaks, broken wings, whatever, there's not going to be hot electrical systems that could cause sparks and fire. And try to get away from the aircraft as quick as possible. One other consideration we didn't mention was check your weather information before you go, and always have in the back of your mind where the wind direction is coming from. That way, if possible, you can pick a suitable landing place into the wind, and therefore decrease the possibility of having a tailwind in landing, which will obviously cause you to come in a little higher airspeed. And one more consideration to become safer pilots during night flying ops we can do is go up and make sure this is done with a certified flight instructor. Go ahead and practice flight recovery by unusual attitudes under the foggles or at night, and once again make sure this is done with a flight instructor. And also, you can practice power on and power off stalls with only reference to the instruments by use of foggles. And this will really help a pilot to become safer and his abilities to recover an aircraft if such a situation may arise in actual night flying conditions, to have a greater knowledge and understanding of the attitude recovery procedures with a limited reference to the outside. So that pretty much covers the operations of flying at night and some of the illusions that our body tries to tell us, and the way the eye works, and some considerations in that, and making sure that we have good health and are available to use our vision to the utmost of our ability at night, and also recognitions of hazards and things we might want to take into consideration for unusual attitude recovery, and also being better pilots altogether.